right. Welcome. I play that song, that absolute classic by ABBA, both because it's Friday night and the lights are low, but also because I have such a distinct memory of when the first year that I was in yeshiva for the Purim spiel. The guys did it was an all guys yeshiva. They did a rendition of Shabbos Queen, and it was all very cute, except that I remember that the rabbis at the yeshiva made them change the lyrics because they had and Hashem will be fed. She took a chunk off the bread. Ooh, right, because you take a piece off of the bread for the challah or whatever. And the rabbi said, I can't decide whether this is silly or profound, but they said, God is not fed by the bread. The priests were fed by the bread. So they made them chant, the Kohen will be fed. Like, that's like theology in action. Even joking around, you can't say that we're feeding God bread. But you know what? We might just challenge that notion tonight. We're going to be talking eventually about feeding God bread. We're going to be talking tonight. This is our final session of a series that started just after the holidays, trying to take us through the basic structure of the daily and now the Shabbat prayers. And tonight, as we've been doing for the last 2 weeks, we're going to continue moving through the service at Ikar, the Shabbat service at Ikar, although we're a little out of order because we started in the morning. And so we're going to finish up today Musaf and then do Kabbalah Shabbat. We'll sort of like jump out of order, but I wanted to end with Kabbalah Shabbat because it is one of the great masterpieces of Jewish prayer. And I think it's just a really good, exquisite space to end on. That might sound like a tall order, Musaf and Kabbalah Shabbat in one night. But actually, I think we can do it because what I have been suggesting to us over these last few weeks is that if you've been paying attention, if you've been studying with us this whole time, or even in pieces, you've gotten things that should now help you see better into the Siddur, so that when we look at Musaf today, it'll be pretty straightforward. You've gotten most of the I'll remind us of some of the information we've gotten before, but mostly for the purpose of Musaf, we're just going to switch out one blessing and take a look at it. And the same thing with Kabbalah Shabbat, and what I mean to say is, and so Musaf will be fairly easy to dispose of, so to speak, to cover. Although Musaf's got some cool stuff going on in it. I was going to say, but it's just the opposite with Kabbalah Shabbat. Kabbalah Shabbat is a unique piece of prayer, somewhat unprecedented piece of liturgy. It's a whole new service. However, the structure of it is fairly straightforward. So hopefully these are both kind of gems of Jewish prayer, but we'll be able to do them in relatively quick time. Let me just say at the outset, in case I forget to say at the end, this is the last session in the Hows and Whys of Jewish prayer. You can find all of our previous sessions on our website. I'll say in a minute a little bit more about those sessions and where we've come from one last time. We will therefore not have class next week, but we are going to have one last kind of bonus session, you might think of it, at this time in 2 weeks. We're going to do a Seder boot camp, how to lead a Seder. So that's something I've done in the past years, and it fits well into this slot because it's another piece of liturgy, but it's like home liturgy. So and it's going to be a longer session. So you can call it a good run tonight, and it was great learning with you. Or if you want to come back in 2 weeks, we'll be doing the Passover Haggadah, and just in a methodical way, the hows and whys as we've come to do at this time. Okay, so all that said, let's say a blessing and then head into our learning for tonight. Blessing over Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. All right. I've already done this a number of times, but I think it's actually good to speak it out again and again where we've come from, because there's been some method to all of this madness. We started in the fall talking about the very concept of Jewish prayer, tefillah. We looked at the word tefillah, which seemed to mean kind of entreating on behalf of someone, and then eventually came to mean entreating on behalf of yourself, pleading to God on behalf of some kind of need. We also noted that the word, the verb for tefillah, lihitpalel, was reflexive. So there was something you were praying inside yourself or doing with yourself also, even though so there's an aspect of talking to God and an aspect of talking to yourself. Then we looked at the origins of our prayer service, which in a word came down to a debate between one side, which said that the prayers are there, the whole prayer system we have is there to replace the sacrifices that we used to offer at the temple. And the other side said, no, prayers are just human. They go all the way back, and our ancestors founded these prayers just to communicate with God. And that was a tension that sort of framed our whole class. Are the prayers meant to recreate the ancient world of the offerings, or are the prayers just talking to God and opening up, and we can see traces of pieces or echoes of both of those theories of prayer in our liturgy. And then what we did, once we kind of mapped all that out, was to begin to build the basic structure of our prayers, our 3 daily prayers. Once we were talking about the sacrificial offerings, then we were able to say, oh, so there are 3 prayers. One of them parallels the morning offering. One of them parallels the afternoon offering. Do that kind of work. But we built up the daily prayers by starting with the core, and the core of the prayers I suggested was the Amidah, the standing silent prayer. We're going to look at one of those tonight. And every prayer service has an Amidah in it. Asterisk. Kabbalah Shabbat does not have an Amidah in it, so that's just a little foreshadow for the differentness, the strangeness of Kabbalah Shabbat. But for the most part, every prayer service has an Amidah in it, and the other core thing that we were looking for was the Shema, and morning and evening prayers have the Shema, and those were the basics of our prayers. And then one last thing before I head into tonight's learning. Once we mentioned the Shema, we also started talking about the power of just words, of the importance of actually speaking out words and saying words, which becomes a replacement for the sacrifices. We offer the famous line of the prophet Hosea is, Nishalma parim sfatenu. Our lips will fulfill what bulls used to fulfill. We used to offer bulls on the altar. Our mouths will create the offering. Okay, so we talked about the power of words, which in one sense goes all the way back, and the prophet Hosea is talking about it, and it goes all the way back. God created the world with words, but on the other hand is a theory that like competes or stands on the side of the idea that we're trying to recreate the offerings, and maybe no, we're not trying to do that anymore. We can just create offerings now with our mouths, with our words. Okay, all of those themes are going to be present in tonight's learning. But where are we right now? We studied all of that stuff. We got a sense of what the morning service, what the afternoon service, what the evening service was, and then we started to move through the Lev Shalem, this book, and just to look at the Shabbat prayers and see, well, now we've covered Psukei de Zimra before, so does it look any different on Shabbat? It does. And we looked at what was added on Shabbat. And now that we've learned the daily prayers, it's easier to notice, oh, Rosh Hashanah has a shacharit, just like every day of the year has a shacharit. It's just that some of the blessings are different. Some of Psukei de Zimra is different, etc. So we've been doing that for the last couple of sessions. Okay, when we last left our hero, the Sidur, we were just at the end of the Torah service. I anticipated doing Musaf last week, but the Torah service, it turns out, took us the entire session because indeed the Torah service kind of brings everything to a halt and just takes up a lot of the space of the day on Shabbat. So it was good that we went, moment by moment through the Torah service. But we're now done. Eitz Chaim Hi Lama Chazikim. But we put the Torah in the ark, and then dun, 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 what happens? The rabbi talks for a long time, but that's not really part of the service. And, there are many services where there is no sermon, okay? But when the sermon is done, and this is sort of interesting, and as I was like putting this together, I suddenly thought, oh, I should have researched this because I don't know. It's interesting. The way we will start Musaf is with a Chatzi Kaddish, and then we'll head into Musaf. So let's take a look at that. And what I mean to say I don't know is is the Chatzi Kaddish attached to the Torah service? In which case, everything's just been delayed. Usually the Kaddish kind of punctuates one service, or is the Chatzi Kaddish a kind of like a running start into the, I'm not sure how it gets blocked off and whether the sermon makes it feel like it's part of one service and not another, but I didn't have time to look it up. But the custom is to say a Chatzi Kaddish, a small Kaddish, and I'll put that. Okay, so first of all, let me give you this link where you can download the Siddur, or at least PDFs of the Siddur, just by filling in your information there. It's a two-step process, so a little complicated. But what I've been doing for these last couple of classes, which I don't usually do, is screen sharing most of the time, and I'm going to do that tonight as well. So here we are, the Chatzi Kaddish, right? The ark has been closed, and you can see it is as if the Chatzi Kaddish belongs to the Torah service, but we usually pause here, offer you some inspiring words of wisdom, and then Chatzi Kaddish, which takes us into the Musaf Amidah for Shabbat. Now, everything I was just saying about you should know the structure of the, or if you know the daily the structure of the daily service of the Amidah, of the structure of the Amidah in general, then when you get to the Musaf Amidah for Shabbat, it should look much the same. Okay, much the same. Here's the first blessing, and it's the same. Here's the second blessing, and it's the same. Here's the third blessing, and it's the same. I'll just point out what they are. The first blessing speaks of Avot, our ancestors, and ends with Shield of Abraham, or Shield of Abraham and Guardian of Sarah. That's the first blessing. Always, every day, every service. Second blessing ends, who gives life to the dead, Machayim Etim, always, okay? Then, I'm purposely, don't worry, I'm purposely not yet explaining what Musaf is or is all about, because we'll get to that. But so far, if you started Musaf, you would be encountering all the same blessings. Now, the third blessing in any of our daily prayers is the blessing of God's holiness. But in the Shabbat, in any repeated Amidah, in Shacharit, anytime the Amidah is repeated, the first time it is done silently by everyone. The second time it is repeated by the Chazan. And in that repetition, there is a Kedusha. A Kedusha is a call and response celebrating God's holiness that is embedded in the third blessing. Third blessing ends right here, in English right here, Baruch Atah Adonai, the holy God. Okay, so this is the third blessing, but the third blessing, when it is repeated by the Chazan, is an extended call and response where, and the whole thing is modeled on us being angels, where there's a heavenly chorus and we respond, holy, holy, holy. Okay, but we've talked about that before, but before I go any further, I want to say that and I said this last week, but just remind us, in our service at Ikar, we do not do the silent Amidah and then the repetition. Instead, we do what's called a Heichi Kedusha, which is just a lead into the Kedusha, what I just described, which means Hillel usually, or whoever's leading, this week it was actually me, will start the community off together. It's a time-saving device. We'll start the community off together. We'll say the first three blessings all together and that Kedusha call and response, and then we will all trail off into our own, the rest of the Amidah. So that's something you should know if you're at Ikar, that's what we're going to do. We're always going to do those first three blessings together and head into the rest. But it is a shortcut, and you should also know that at a different shul, what you may see is Musaf. Remember, there was a Chatzi Kaddish, say the Kaddish, and then everybody quietly does Musaf, the way they would quietly do Shacharit. And then the Chazan would repeat the whole thing, including the Kedusha. Okay, now that's pretty much it for Musaf. But what is Musaf? Why is it there? And what is the major kind of liturgical difference? So I'm going to show you that in the next blessing. Musaf just means extra. Musaf, additional. Lahosif, to add on to. So Musaf is the additional. It's the additional offering. In other words, it is a stand-in. Remember the prayers, the theory are stand-in for the sacrifices. Well, there was an extra sacrifice on Shabbat. And so Musaf just represents the extra sacrifice. Now, that's something that should be digestible and known to you if you've, as I said, if you've been following along. But it's much more explicit in Musaf. In the Musaf prayer in general, we tend to have because it's not like it's not something that we say every day. It's there to represent the offering. And so the Musaf prayer, more than most of our other prayers, actually feels like in its wording, it's about offerings. Okay? Like it says, oh, this is the Shabbat offering. And it even quotes the section of the Torah, that's Numbers chapter 28, the section of the Torah that actually lists what the Shabbat offering was. That's actually in Musaf. So we actually speak that out loud, and then that's really what evokes the lines of Hosea, right? Nishalma parim sfatenu. We'll speak out the offering. So let me just show you that now. So like in the Shacharit service and Mincha and Mariv, every Amidah Shabbat has 7 blessings in it. During the week, the Amidah has 18 blessings in it, and then one was added later, so 19 altogether. But on Shabbat, the first 3 are the same, the last 3 are the same. The middle one is just devoted to Shabbat. And that's true in Musaf as well, but where back in Shacharit, it was just flowery language about Shabbat. Oh, Moses rejoiced when Moses got Shabbat. Shabbat is so great. Blessed is God, Mekadesh Shabbat, who sanctifies the Shabbat. On Musaf, the middle blessing is really about the Shabbat offering. So here we go. We finish the Kedusha and we head into the 4th blessing. And by the way, I should just say this, just since this is meant to be instruction. The way this works, we did this last week, so I'm not going to repeat the whole format of Kedusha, but the Chazan sets us up for Kedusha, says the 2nd blessing, and then we begin reciting this first part, and then the Chazan repeats it, and then we recite in the bold. And the important thing is our response is in the bold, but we end up saying the whole thing, because the parts that are not in bold, as soon as the Chazan has said it's a funny thing. We actually end up saying everything first. We say this piece here or this piece here, and then the Chazan repeats it. And then when the Chazan repeats it, then we respond. But then the Chazan also says these words. So in the end, we're saying everything before the Chazan does. So this is the Kedusha, and it allows the Chazan to finish the Kedusha with the blessing, the Holy God. But when the Chazan finishes, then we will go back and recite the blessing of the Holy God ourselves. This is a little bit of a tricky one because we would have already done that if we had said it silently, but because the Kedusha comes before, right, in the middle of the 3rd blessing, we're gonna have to just say it quietly to ourselves. We actually, the Chazan finishes the Kedusha, and then we say the 3rd blessing and then head into the 4th blessing. I don't know if that was so easy to understand. So just if you didn't, don't worry about it. Just consider that like me explaining a technicality for those who really want to know. Okay, but this is what I wanted to show you tonight. This is the 4th blessing. And it's the 4th blessing in Musaf, and it is really about korbanot, about offerings. Shabbat and the temple service. You established Shabbat and desired its offerings. You prescribed the details of the service and the order of the libations. Okay, here's some nice flowery words about Shabbat, but again, it's to offer an additional appropriate sacrifice on Shabbat. Korban Musaf, an additional sacrifice. Okay, then a little call for us, please bring us back into the land. But this isn't like just like, oh, proto-Zionism. This is bring us back into the land so that we can offer your sacrifices. This is like, get us back to the temple, the daily sacrifices. And then, as I said, there's actually a quote from here it is, here's the citation, Numbers chapter 28, of the exact offering that they would offer. So this is what Musaf is here to stand in for: 2 yearling lambs without blemish, together with 2/10 of a measure of choice flour with oil, mixed in as a meal offering with the proper libation, a burnt offering for every Shabbat, in addition to the daily burnt offering and its libation. Now that is very explicit. That is very unusual. Yes, sure, the prayers are a stand-in for the sacrifices, but rarely do you get like how many exactly bulls, how much flour is there oil in the mixture? But Musaf always has that, okay? So that's one thing about Musaf, which is that it is, in some ways, it's the very fulfillment of a theory that we mentioned at the outset of this class, which is the prayers are there to take the place of the sacrifices that we can no longer offer. So that's Musaf, and that's the blessing. But there's one other cool thing going on in Musaf that I have to point out, and I'll just put it back on screen. Let's see if you can pick it up visually first. It's just here in the beginning of the first blessing. You see here, is anything going on in the Hebrew? Look at the way the first letters of each word are bolded.
Reverse acrostic.
Oh, who said that?
Gideon,
correct. It's an acrostic, which we've seen before, an alphabetical acrostic, which we've seen before. Ashrei is an alphabetical acrostic. Aleph, here's all the praises I have for you, God, that start with Aleph. Bet, Gimel, Daled. But, and this is unusual, this prayer is a reverse acrostic. So it goes ZYX, right, instead of ABC. So it starts with Tikanta Shabbat Retzitza Korbanoteha. You establish Shabbat and desired its offerings. That is Taf, Shin, Resh, Kuf, and then on through up to Aleph. Okay. Now, acrostics can represent different things, can work in different ways, right? Like most of all, they represent the attempt to sort of virtuosic attempt to be able to sing God's praises with every sound of the alphabet. But in this case, going in reverse order, they symbolize a kind of reverse order. Like we're down here, we're Z, and we're going to go back up to the origin up there, right? Aleph always represents God because it's the first, it's the one. So the reverse acrostic is like saying, here, we're offering up an offering. We're going to mention what the offering is. We're going to actually literally speak it out. And it's going to, like smoke, rise back up to the top. Okay? So there's a way in which we're actually, so now you see the theory of prayer as replacement of the sacrifices and this other theory of prayer as the power of words to create, both of those coming together in this composition for the middle blessing of Musaf. Okay, so that's what's going on in Musaf. And then Musaf ends, that blessing ends with, oh, by the way, I should just tell you, many congregations, movements debate this. The Reform movement is strong on it. The conservative movement is divided on it. But many movements do not like the heavy emphasis on offerings. They'd like to get us past a Judaism that looks back to the temple. So the Lev Shalem offers an alternative, one that does not focus on offerings. We do the traditional one at Ikar, but just know that that's here and it's actually available to you if you are one of those people. But it's an alternate so for those people who are not into animal sacrifice. I mean, who among us is not into animal sacrifice? I don't know who those people could possibly be, but if so, that's available to you. And then the blessing has some standard Shabbat flourishes and then ends just like the Shacharit blessing ends, Mekadesh Shabbat, makes the Sabbath holy. Okay, so that's pretty much all I want to say about Musaf, except that you should know. And today we're just covering Shabbat. So I'm not going to be covering all the Musafs, like the Musafs of Rosh Hashanah, which is extremely complicated. But I do have to mention something that's happening actually this week, which is that when the new month, the marking of the new month, Rosh Chodesh, falls out on Shabbat, there's a different Musaf that accounts for the additional offerings for Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh. So that happens to be next here in this PDF. So I'll just show you. We're not going to go through it in great detail, but okay, this is the last 3 blessings of the Amidah, and now we're done with the Amidah. But if it were Rosh Chodesh, which it will be this Shabbat, again, first 3 same blessings. Okay, there's the Kedusha, the thing that we do back, like call and response with the Chazan, and then the 4th blessing is the celebration of Rosh Chodesh. So it speaks instead, it's also a focus on sacrifices, but it speaks instead of the sacrifices of the new moon and the ritual of marking the new moon and the festival that would take place on Rosh Chodesh. And then here we go. This is a quote from Numbers chapter 28. On Shabbat, this is what we saw before, but also on the new moon. And listing and an ephah of choice flour and an ephah of choice flour. I mean, really detailed, list all the sacrifices, okay? So it's a different musaf that contains blessings or offerings for both Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh. And that's something we'll just say everyone. It's not every month we say this. It's only when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbat, okay? If Rosh Chodesh falls out on a regular day of the week, it has its own musaf that does not include Shabbat, okay? But in this case, we're learning our Shabbat prayers, so you should just know that that's in there. And this week, you actually have a chance to implement it, okay? The blessing then, instead of being Mikadesh Shabbat, will be who makes Shabbat, the people Israel, and the new moon festival holy. So Mikadesh Shabbat, v'Yisrael v'Roshei Chadashim. The final blessing in the final, or I should say the signet, the seal to the middle blessing in Musaf now includes Rosh Chodesh as well. Okay, I'm going to say just that's Musaf Rosh Chodesh. I'll pause in just a second in case anyone has any questions. But that's the end of Musaf, whether a regular Shabbat or a Rosh Chodesh Shabbat. And then there's a Kaddish Shalem, a full Kaddish. And then sometimes in our service, we will go back to earlier in the Sidur and say a special psalm for Shabbat so that we can say an additional mourner's Kaddish at this point. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. No, we don't. No, we don't. I'm confused. Skip that. That last part, I was just like confusing what happens after Shachari. Skip that. Okay. So we're done. I'm like, I'm just getting started here, but we're done with our service. And then the Sidur has, and this is important for us at Ikar, the Sidur has a closing poem called Ein Keloheinu. There is no one like our God. The Sidur has that closing poem, and then Aleinu, and then Mourner's Kaddish. That's what I was thinking of. I sort of transposed it to Shacharit. But so what we would do after Musaf is sing Ein Keloheinu, or however, we usually actually sing. All right, so hold on. Speaking of we usually. At Ikar, when I got to Ikar, I learned they do things slightly differently. And this is an elegant choice, I think. Hillel and Rabbi Browse, when they were talking about the service at first, they didn't think it was like a great closing after all the fanfare of Shabbat prayers to say Aleinu and then Mourner's Kaddish, and that's it. So they took that song, Ein Keloheinu, and they airlifted it and just put it at the end. So after Musaf, we say Aleinu, Mourner's Kaddish, important to have the Mourner's Kaddish, and then we end with a rousing Ein Keloheinu. And not only that, if you've been at Ikar or watched it on TV, you know that we sing Ein Keloheinu both in the Hebrew and the Ladino here, mostly because it's available on the side and there's a cool tune that I don't know where we got, but is so great. And so we sing this whole thing in both Hebrew and Ladino. Nice tradition that we have at Ikar, and we end on this. Yay, hooray, the end. Okay? So that's Shabbat morning services at Ikar. Okay, and now we're going to move to Kabbalah Shabbat. Any questions here in the middle? Anything unclear? Yes, Ariella.
That reverse acrostic Is it also missing that letter like the other one?
No, that's an oddity of Ashrei. This one has every letter. Yeah. Gideon.
Thank you.
What's the line before Adonai Svatai? And it's only in Musaf, right? The Kishem, blah blah blah.
Kishem Hashem Ekra Habu Gadol Eloheinu. When I call out the name of God, I bring glory to our God. Where is that from?
It's a psalm.
It's from Psalms. Kishem Hashem Ekra Habu Gadol Eloheinu. Jonathan, do you know why we say it sometimes and don't say it sometimes?
I do not.
Yeah, neither do I. I think actually, I'm a little like, we're seeing it here and you're saying it's not in some, I think some people say both every day. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. Let me see. Let me just show folks what Gideon's asking about. There's an opening. We haven't even really talked about this, but there is an opening before you head into the silent Amidah. You usually say this, Adonai Sfasai Tiftach Ufi Yagid Tilatecha. I guess the way they're I mean, if this is an answer, I'm not sure, but it seems like when you are leading, repeating, this actually makes sense because of the grammar. When I call out the name of God, you all bring glory to our God. So it's a little bit of a call and response. I think actually, I'm just using the logic of looking at these notations, but I think this is for the repetition. And this is for just the regular silent Amidah, from every Amidah. So this line here, Adonai, open my lips that my mouth may speak your praise, is something we say quietly before the Amidah. I hadn't covered it before, but good to point it out. And this is when you are repeating the Amidah for the congregation. Okay, does that make sense? I think that's probably right. Not sure. Okay, anything else? Okay,
why has Ikar done away with the Don Olam, which is how I grew up ending services?
Yeah, good point. There's lots of things that come. Adon Olam is not mandatory. It's a song. It's like a song that we sing after services. There are different traditions, and some people sing Adon Olam on Friday night, and some people sing it on Saturday. But it is pretty classic to hear it on Saturday. But all I can say is it's optional, and Ikar has done away with a lot of things that are optional because of an attempt to create a service which is pretty darn traditional, but accounts for the fact that I'll just say I'll state the obvious, which is that we are trying to create a service which is at once traditional, liturgically in Hebrew, fulfilling all of the requirements of traditional Jewish law, and at the same time hosting a service in which most of the people sitting there do not read Hebrew, follow Hebrew, sometimes not even know what, everything that we've been learning together. That's why we've had this class. And because of that, we're trying to create a service that has a lot of singing in it that you could follow along with, even if you didn't know all the prayers, doesn't overburden you with the next psalm and the next psalm and the next song and the next song. And I also think it's true that our Torah service is very extensive because even though the Torah itself is in Hebrew, a lot of the talking around the Torah service is in English, and it is like talking, and it's accessible, and it's the part of the service that some of the congregation really that's when they're tuned in. So these are some of the executive decisions that get made by minds greater than mine who have been here longer than I have. So okay, Kabbalah Shabbat. Of course, I haven't left enough time for Kabbalah Shabbat, but Kabbalah Shabbat is a very special prayer, very, very special prayer, very dear to my heart, and I think to most people's who participate in regular Jewish prayer. Kabbalah Shabbat it's a favorite. There's something about entering into Shabbat. It's mostly sung. And of course, at its heart is the centerpiece is Chadoti, right? The famous piyut poem Chadoti, and we're going to talk about that tonight. Okay, let me give you just one source before we go back into our Siddur. I want to give you one source, and mostly in this class we studied source sheets, but I'm going to give you one source that we're going to look at just so you have a sense of where does this come from? Where does Kabbalah Shabbat come from? Because it's not in the Torah. It doesn't parallel any of the sacrifices. It doesn't have an Amidah in it. It's this wholly separate thing. And the answer is that it was composed in the 16th century in Tzfat, the great center of Jewish mysticism, at the great kind of revival of Jewish mysticism that was taking place there in the 16th century. It is a prayer that is put together by Kabbalists, by Jewish mystics, has traces of that all over it, but became so beloved that it just sort of swept through the Jewish world. Having said that, I have known congregations that do not say Kabbalah Shabbat because they're sort of like, a Litvish, stark, like anti-Kabbalistic philosophy. So Kabbalah Shabbat itself is kind of optional, but it has become so widespread at this point. It's an interesting legal philosophical question. When does something become so standard that it's no longer optional? But Kabbalah Shabbat feels almost like it's part of our prayer cycle now, but it's actually a totally unique thing that was created in the 1500s. Okay, let me just give you the one source of background, just because it's a very beautiful thing to see. Where did they get this idea of Kabbalah Shabbat? And the whole thing is based on a couple of lines in the Talmud. Here they are. Let me give you actually, I said a link to this source. Some folks, I think, like having the links to the sources. So this, the piece we're going to look at is from the Talmud, just a couple of in passing lines. They're talking about all the great delights of Shabbat and all the things people would do for delight on Shabbat. And then it says on Shabbat page 119, Rabbi Hanina would wrap himself in his cloak, or maybe it was his talis, on the eve of Shabbat and say, "Come, boy, v'netzeli krat Shabbat hamalka. Come and we will go out to greet Shabbat the Queen." Shabbat the Queen. Okay, so you can see there some of the language. Come, let's go out and let's greet Shabbat. That's language we'll soon see in Kabbalah Shabbat. And you see the first formulation of what becomes the kind of central poetic image in Chadoti, which is that Shabbat is a queen and we are welcoming the queen in. And that, if there is a theme to Kabbalah Shabbat, it's that the queen is arriving and we are there to welcome her, and her name is Shabbat. Okay, but it's a little more complicated than that. Let me just give you the other piece in the Talmud, which is that, so that's already a source text. And then we get even another, it seems there was more than one rabbi that would do something like this, because Rabbi Yanai would also put his garment on the eve of Shabbat and say, Boi kala, enter, O bride, enter, O bride. Okay, so now we have a queen, that's one metaphor. Now we have something else though, which is a bride. So the queen is going to get married? Like just two separate traditions? Well, it'll be good to know both of them because Chadoti is actually going to play on both of those. Okay, we'll get to Chadoti in a second. But as for Kabbalah Shabbat, now it's long and you're thinking, whoa, we're running out of time. How is Rabbi Kasher possibly going to cover all of Kabbalah Shabbat in the next 18 minutes? Although that's a good Jewish number, so maybe I can do it. But I'm not going to cover all of Kabbalah Shabbat. I'm not going to take us through every single psalm. I'm just going to tell you the basic structure. And even when I say it to you, and honestly, I davened Kabbalah Shabbat for years before I even got that this was happening. But it's important to note that Kabbalah Shabbat essentially is composed of 6 psalms, and then Chadoti, and then a 7th psalm that is dedicated to the Sabbath day. Okay? 6 psalms, Chadoti, and then a special psalm for the Shabbat. So now, that's it, pretty much. Because if I were to say, what is the structure about? What is going on there? What are we thinking? What are we doing? Well, we've already seen our liturgy, or the composers of our liturgy, play on the number 7 to evoke Shabbat. But when we see it in this way, where we have 6 psalms and then something happening and then a psalm dedicated to Shabbat, that means that the 6 psalms represent the 6 days of the week. Okay? And then something happens, and then we get to Shabbat. Okay, so that's the basic theological, cosmological arc of Kabbalah Shabbat. Now let's go look at it inside. But even if I just told you that and you had not heard that before, Dayenu, that's good information, because that's basically what Kabbalah Shabbat is there to do. Now let's see it happen. Now, I said 6 Chadoti and 1, but of course, you know, as I think you've learned by now with the Siddur, it's always like, oh, plus one more thing they added in, plus one more thing they added in, plus one more. So that'll be true along the way. Keep in mind 6 Chadoti and 1, but there's little things added in along the way. So even before we get to, oh, hold on, where am I? Everybody see this? Yedid Nefesh. Even before we get to Shabbat, we often recite in the way that Amy was just saying, we recite Odon Olam at the end of services. There are certain songs that become like classic songs to sing before or after services. Before Kabbalah Shabbat, the classic song to sing is Yedid Nefesh. Yedid Nefesh is an absolutely like heartbreakingly beautiful love poem to God, right? It's like, it's the longing for God's love and attention is quite pronounced. Beloved of my soul, compassionate Father, draw me your servant to your desire. Would that I could run like a gazelle and bow before your beauty, for I find your love sweeter than any honey or any delight. Very Song of Songs kind of imagery. And keep that in mind, because the Kabbalists love Song of Songs. In fact, in most Sephardic traditions, they recite the entirety of Song of Songs before Kabbalah Shabbat. But in Ashkenazi traditions, they usually just start with Yedid Nefesh. And we've been looking at acrostics here. I will just note that if you're in Kabbalah Shabbat, you should always be paying attention to acrostics, because if you look at this one, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, that acrostic simply forms the 4-letter name of God, right? Yedid Nefesh, the beloved of my soul, is actually God, and I'm speaking out God's name. And so this is like just a hint to what's to come, the kind of Kabbalistic poetry that will dominate Kabbalah Shabbat. Okay, did I see a question raised before then? No, okay. Okay, so now let's head into Kabbalah Shabbat. Here is, I said there are 6 psalms, and our Siddur here does such a nice job. It's early in this, it's the first service in this red Siddur. So it's here just on page 11 that we begin Kabbalah Shabbat. And Kabbalah Shabbat, the Siddur does a handy job here of noting to you that this is the first of those 6 psalms, and it enumerates them in much the same way we saw the Siddur doing in Psuke de Zimra as well, for when it would have a lot of inserted psalms in a row. So the editors of this Siddur want to name that for you or mark that for you. So here's the first one, and it's Psalm 95. Why is Psalm 95 the first one? Probably because it begins, let us go and sing to Adonai. And that was the spirit of Kabbalah Shabbat that we saw mentioned in the Talmud. Let's go. And in fact, I should stop right now and say, I just said, oh, the Kabbalists came up with this, but it's more than just that they strung some psalms together. They had a practice based on this tradition in the Talmud to go out into the fields, to wrap themselves up and go out into the field and wait and bring Shabbat in, sing outside in the fields, right? And that's the way it really should be done. So just a note there that that's how Kabbalah started. Again, playing on the idea of let's go out. Okay, so that's one of the reasons we start on Psalm 95. And then imagine this is Sunday. Your week began, and you sing your way through Sunday. Now, as we've said many times before, a lot of the singing will happen just in the last lines of the psalm, but sometimes we will sing the entire psalm. So in this case, we usually don't sing, we'll sing something like, and then quietly recite this, and then the Chazan may sing, Arba'im Shana Kut Bedor, right? They might add a tune here for the end. Sometimes the chazan will do that. And sometimes the chazan, and I keep saying chazan, it could be a chazanit, right? But we have a chazan. Sometimes the chazan will sing the entire thing because there's a famous tune that goes to this psalm. So here's the second psalm, and we might sing Shiru Ladonai, Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, and that tune will take us through the rest of the psalm. Okay, but it's Psalm 96. So Sunday was Psalm 95. Monday is Psalm 96. What is Tuesday going to be? That's right, Psalm 97. And, we kind of alternate. Usually we don't sing this one, but just sing some words at the end. And then Wednesday is Psalm 98. We do sing this one. And now I know I'm going fast here, and we should probably study all of these things, but tonight's goal is just to give us a sense of, okay, Thursday, right? Yom HaChamishi is the 5th and has this psalm, Psalm 99. Did we skip there? Yeah, I think we did. It goes from, 98, 99, 95 to 99. And here, I'm anticipating, because then you would get to Psalm 100, but no, the 6th psalm, that is the Friday psalm, is very distinct and important. We all stand up for this one. We stand up as a congregation and we sing this one together. Now, you can see here, the mystic Isaac Luria would begin the Friday evening service with this psalm. So that's a nice note there, because you can see Kabbalah Shabbat was not fully formed by 1572. They were working it out. And according to one tradition, they would just start with this psalm here. Why is this psalm so important? It's not 100, it's Psalm 29. And I'll tell you, there may be many reasons why this psalm is so important, but certainly a Kabbalist like Isaac Luria would say the fact that it has the voice of God mentioned 7 times, that's probably significant. And the fact that it has the name of God mentioned 18 times, that's also probably significant, okay, to say the least. So that gives you a sense of what to look for. When you're looking at a Kabbalistically composed prayer service, you're gonna look for the acrostics, count up the words, because those are the things that they cared about. Okay, so that's the 6th day. That's the day that we were created. So we like the 6th day. We all stand up because it's like our day. Okay, and we've moved through the week. Part of what Kabbalah Shabbat is meant to do is to meditatively take us back through the week we've been in, and then 6 days, and the creation is finished, and then comes Chadoti. But as I said, nope, there's always a little insertion. So before Chadoti, we actually don't usually say this at Ikar, but you should know, it's Kabbalists after all, and they like to stick in the stuff they like. I'm not going to explain the whole meaning of Ana B'Koach. I couldn't. But before Chadoti, the very famous Chadoti, there is an also famous Ana B'Koach little prayer here that I don't know what to say about it, except that the first letters of all of these 42 words is supposed to spell out the 42 letter name of God. And every 3 words itself is supposed to form a new, so Aleph, Bet, Gimel is one name of God, Yud, Taf, Tzadi is another name of God. There's a whole system here that I do not understand. Okay, so I cannot explain it to you, but I do know that Ana B'Koach is it's a kind of an emblem. You'll see it sometimes on bracelets, because it's thought to be one of these poems that secretly speaks out a hidden name of God. And that's why it's there. So here we are in the space between the 6 days and Shabbat. Chadoti is going to do most of the work, but it's as if we're hovering, and lots of mystical stuff can be kind of bubbling up here. Kathy Kobayashi.
I just wanted to say that in the early days of Ikar, so this is 2007, maybe before, but we used to do Ana B'Koach, and it was so beautiful. And it was, it was part of it. And so somehow it got dropped. So I just wanted to put in a pitch for Ana B'Koach. I don't understand it, but I just think it's really, really beautiful. And it was part of the tradition.
This is like a perfect illustration of why we only add things, we never get rid of them, right? Because probably there are two traditions. There's the Chadoti tradition, there's the Ana B'Koach tradition, and some shul in like Constantinople or something, they cut out Ana B'Koach, and then Kathy Kobayashi, is like her soul equivalent there, was like, no, you got to say Ana B'Koach. So then we just do both. So that's a perfect example. But yes, that's right. I like Ana B'Koach too. Lots of great tunes to that. Okay, I only have a few minutes here, so I'm going to try and get us through L'Chadodi here. Now, I said, so Ana B'Koach, that's all I'm going to say about that for now, but it does have all of it. You can read this stuff, all of this mystical significance. Okay. L'Chadodi, I'm going to explain in a minute, but before I do, I just want to note that after L'Chadodi comes another psalm, and this psalm is Psalm 92, which is a psalm dedicated to the Shabbat day. Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat. So this is the announcement that it is Shabbat. Okay? Today is Shabbat. This is the announcement that it is Shabbat. We went through the 6 days and then we arrived at Shabbat. So what does that mean about L'Chadodi? It means that L'Chadodi, and this is just critical. L'Chadodi is bringing Shabbat in. The idea of L'Chadodi, and maybe Ana B'Koach as well, you've done the 6 days and then something happens in L'Chadodi that actually brings in the presence of Shabbat, so that when you're done with L'Chadodi, you can say, now it is Shabbat. We have done it. And okay, I want to talk about what the theology behind that is, but I just want to emphasize again, because it's a very Kabbalistic thing to do, but there's actually something about it that we're coming to the end of this series, and I want to end on this note because it's a very powerful note, but also a complicated one. This idea that our prayers actually affect change in the world, right? Now, in this case, it's not such a hard argument to make, because what is Shabbat except our keeping of it? So we create Shabbat. We bring it into the room. We bring it into being, and we do that with L'Chadodi. Okay, now, what does that even mean, and what is L'Chadodi doing? Well, I'm just going to give us a taste. It's so wild and complicated. It would take us hours and hours and hours and hours to unpack, but we're just going to do just like the first pass at it, which is just a careful look at the words themselves of the refrain. L'Chadodi likrat kala, come my beloved, let us go greet the bride. Remember, that was one of the terms in the Talmud. L'Chadodi likrat kana, panei Shabbat ne Kabala. We will greet the face of the Shabbat. Okay, so now let's just take a look at the phrasing there. And in this case, let's pay attention to the gender of the words and the subjects here, okay? And then we'll try to figure out who's talking to who, because it actually, for the Kabbalists, it was very important. And the gender is important because they had a kind of an erotically charged theology. There was something about like commingling that was like a big sexual commingling that was a big metaphor for them. So that's quite a thing to throw out at the end of class, but take a look at how it works here. L'Chadodi, come my beloved. Now, is that masculine or feminine? It's masculine, Dodi, my beloved. And again, this is a formulation you will find in Song of Songs. So my male beloved, come with me, and we will go and greet the bride, who is Shabbat. Okay, now, there's lots of stanzas. We could talk about them, Likrat Shabbat. There's lots of great stuff in there. We're not going to have time to do it today, but just that phrasing, come, my beloved male, let us go greet the bride female, that is Shabbat. Who is the male in this analogy? It is Adonai. And in fact, Dodi is Yud Daled Vav Daled, and that's kind of a like, if it were Yud Hey Vav Hey, or right, sorry, backwards. Daled Vav Daled Yud, but if it were Yud hey, the next letter, vav, hey, it's like playing with words and letters is big for the Kabbalists. But if you do that, it turns the name into God, Adonai, which is a masculine noun. Shabbat, though, is feminine. So now there's like, so what's happening there? We're bringing God in to the bride. Is God now, it seems, going to get married to the bride, but does God get married to Shabbat? So the key here is that the bride is Shabbat, but actually the bride is the Shekhinah, the feminine presence of God, right? So the idea here in Chadoti and all over Kabbalistic theology is that now the male presence of God comes in, the feminine presence of God comes in, and they unite, which I suppose is, I should say is heteronormative, but it is also significantly procreative, right? It isn't just sex, it's about a union that could create new life, right? Creation. And in Kabbalistic theology, it's such a crazy thing to say in the last minute of a class, but the idea was that if we could unite the masculine energy of God and the feminine energy of God, unify them, then God becomes fully unified, for God is both male and female, after all, and everything else. And that's true unity. Then we've really achieved true awareness of what God is. And that's what we're supposed to be trying to achieve on Shabbat. And just one last thing, because there are three subjects here, right? You, like male presence of God, come, greet female presence of God, unify, create union. Who am I? I'm just Israel. I'm just us. And the idea that the Kabbalists believe in is that it is our job to unite God. Now, male and female don't get caught up in that because that was their metaphor. But the idea was our job is to create a sense of increasing unity in the world, increasing awareness of the unity of God's presence in the world. And that's what Kabbalah Shabbat does. That's the idea, is that we move through the 6 days and then we perform this complicated Kabbalistic union of God and the Shekhinah to create the unity that is Shabbat, and then we fall into Shabbat. Okay, so that is a lot to, as I said, as a wallop to throw out there in the last few minutes, but it is a sense of the movement of Kabbalah Shabbat. What's going on there? What is happening with Kabbalah Shabbat? And so when we say Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, now it is Shabbat, it's because we've just, with our prayer, performed some kind of sacred, divine mating ritual, which has created unity in the world, which has created Shabbat in the world, okay? Okay, that's quite a lot to do, right? Good Shabbos, everyone. I want to mention a few more things. We're probably, let's say we'll go 10 minutes late, last class, we'll go 10 minutes late. I want to mention a few more things before we close, but I see some questions popping up before I do. That is pretty much Kabbalah Shabbat. I'm just going to mention a few last notes. Any last questions about Kabbalah Shabbat? Kathy, is your hand up on purpose? No. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So Amy, was that you?
Quick question. Why do we change melody in the middle of Chadoti?
Oh, that's a beautiful tradition. It's a good question. It's a beautiful tradition. My brother once told me, it's one of my favorite fun facts that I don't know if it's true. My brother once, but it makes sense. My brother once told me that he read somewhere that Chadoti is the words that have had the most tunes set to them, right, in history. Meaning, like this makes some sense because Chadoti is universal, is like swept across the Jewish world, but every congregation has its own melodies. So Chadoti has been sung in so many melodies, and I think the answer to your question, Amy, is just that there's a little bit of a, there's an eagerness to experience Chadoti in a at least a couple of different ways in the service. So the tradition is to start with one melody and then to break off for the last few verses into a different melody. Some people sing the same melody all throughout. So, but that's it's just the joy of Chadoti and the ability to play around with different energies within Chadoti and different traditions around singing Chadoti. Okay, let me just now give you just the last pieces here. I said there are pieces here I don't really understand. I've never really understood why. Oh, first of all, I want to say after Chadoti, we welcome mourners into the congregation if there is someone who is in a period of mourning, of Shiva, and comes to shul for Shabbat, because you leave your house for the Shabbat only, but they come in after Shabbat. Once again, a sign that we have brought in Shabbat, and now the mourners can be with us, because there is now an exception for them. They can be part of our joy. We talked about that actually this Shabbat. Okay, then there's the Psalm of Shabbat, which announces that it's the Shabbat day. And then I don't know why, but then it seems a little less elegant, but then there's one more. And the only explanation I have is that was Psalm 92, this is Psalm 93, and they just like the flourish at the end, right? The in your house, beautiful in its holiness, for your testimonies endure, Adonai, for all time. I think they just like that as an ending instead of the ending of Shabbat, which is Adonai is upright in my rock, in whom there is no flaw. I mean, that's fine too, but I don't know. I just think Psalm 92 is the Shabbat, and then they just add Psalm 93, and that's what we close with. And then we have mourners Chodesh. And then there are different customs here for like a little break in the middle, Shabbat study text. The Ashkenazi tradition studies Mishnah, law, and the Sephardic tradition studies the mysticism, Zohar, and that tells you something about those two traditions. But that's pretty much it. Okay, that is also pretty much it for our class. I want to just share one last text with you, just one last text that I'm sitting with here as we close out. Because I said I wanted to end on this note, just contemplation. I don't have any kind of big answers here, but I want us to leave reflecting on this idea that Kabbalah Shabbat has proposed to us, that we could actually do something with our prayers, that our prayers could affect the world around us. Because that, after all, is a big debate, even in classical Jewish theology. It's not like modern people are the first to wonder if prayers really cause rain, right? Even in classical medieval Jewish theology, they're wondering about such things. Now, on the one end of that debate is like, I need rain. I say, God, I need rain. God hears me and brings rain, right? That's one version of it. All the way over on the other end is a sort of a more modern formulation of what it means to say that prayer affects change, which is to say, well, prayer affects change in me, and that has an effect on the world. But I mean, nothing changes out there, but I am changed. Remember, prayer is reflexive. I change myself, and so that changes the world. I think my beliefs lie somewhere in the middle of those two. I don't think I believe solely in either of those models, but I don't know what I believe exactly. I may believe that there is a kind of a listening that takes place in the universe, you know. But whatever it is, I think that actually the two poles of like, I call out to God and God does something on the one hand, and I affect change in myself on the other hand, those two poles are important to keep in mind. And actually the formulation, which I think is best at playing with those two possibilities and maybe merging those two possibilities. The formulation that I want to end this class on becomes very, very, very popular in the Hasidic movement, but it already appears in the Zohar. In the Zohar, one of the classic mystical text of Judaism. And in the Zohar, this is also on that source sheet that I sent you earlier. Let's see if I still have the same chat. I'm going to end on this text because it's a very important phrasing for us to contemplate and just sort of wonder about what version of this could we believe in, or what might it mean to us in order to believe that our prayers really have an effect. And the formulation by the Zohar, interestingly, comments on exactly the same chapter that we use to borrow the recipes for Musaf, for our insertions. And remember, we read the ephah flour and the oil, and all of that comes from Numbers chapter 28. The Zohar quotes Numbers chapter 28, which tells us God tells us to bring my offering, my bread, by my fire. And the Zohar wants to play with the strange fact that it says my offering, but God is talking. And so the Zohar says this, a little typo there, the holy blessed one's offering. oh, my offering, it must be that God makes an offering. The Holy Blessed One's offering comes daily in order to nourish the world and give subsistence to above and below. So God makes an offering too, and that sustains the whole world. But how does that get done? And this is the great phrase of the Zohar. For an awakening below brings about an awakening above. Here it is in the Aramaic. Sure. And it's a very, very big and important phrase. Daha itaruta dilatata itar le'ela. This is a huge idea that defines much of Jewish mysticism after this. And through this, every single thing is provided for. So the theory that the Zohar holds, is it we that affect change through our prayer energy, or are we causing change in the cosmos? Their answer to that was, when you affect a change in your own soul, it echoes on high. Now, what that means, I'm not sure, but they spoke about it almost like there were strings. There were strings, and an awakening here would pull a string, and there'd be an awakening above. So I don't know what that means. I don't know exactly where my beliefs land in all of that, but I do know that it's a powerful force to experiment with. And I wanted to end on it because I have been doing that during the pandemic in a way that I have never done before in my life, just trying to pray as if I could heal people, as if I could bring about healing into the world. How does that happen? Does it happen? Does it increase just my faith and my ability to contribute? You can formulate it in a modern way or in an ancient way, but I encourage us all, now that we know some of the building blocks and the structure of our prayer, to experiment with the possibility that we're really doing something here. I'm not asking you to believe that God is there listening on the other end of the door, but that somehow an awakening within brings about awakening above, and that sustains the entire world. So may we see an awakening within, may we see a great awakening without, and may the world be sustained and nourished by our prayers. It has been such an honor to go on this journey with you. I really love davening with this community, and I love learning with this community, and of course those two things go hand in hand, and they certainly have in this series. So thank you everybody for joining me along this tour. All of the classes are available online. We won't have class next week, but we will have a version of it in 2 weeks if you want to come back for a kind of how to move through the Passover Seder. And that is all, folks. Thanks to Vera for running the Zoom. Thanks to you all for your learning, and
Thank you.
good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
תודה רבה, תודה רבה.
Good.
Bye.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
What's next?
That's what I want to know.